Hey everybody, welcome back. Uh, well, for me, it's only been a couple of hours. For you, it's been, well, the last chapter of The Sword of Shannara. It went out 4 days ago. I should have posted today. Well, actually, technically, in 30 minutes, it'll be yesterday. So I am behind. I'm, well, it's completely my fault. I've been For those of you who are following Dragon Singer, I have been putting a big push on getting all of that recorded, which I finished earlier tonight, just as my husband was walking in the door. So, actually, when he walked in, I had like one page left, so I was able to quickly get that finished. So he wasn't stuck in the hallway interrupting because my ring light is out in the middle of our little hallway, makeshift hallway here. Uh, and I was thinking I might start this one, I might not. Depends on how I feel. If I was gonna, I'm wide awake. And because I'm wide awake, I might as well get some work done. But I know I'm not quite at a point where I can concentrate hard enough to edit. Because sometimes I'm really silly. What you see has a lot cut out. When I make errors, I'm either self deprecating or I torment myself or I make funny noises and faces. Skitter keeps me in control most of the time, but it doesn't always work. I spent this evening starting a new knitting project. Just some Irish moss. I'm making a boot cuff because the surgical boot that I'm having to wear right now because my ankle is being a pain in the backside is cutting into my leg and it hurts. Mainly because I don't normally have things pushing on there and boot cuffs are made for a reason. So I'm doing the Irish moss because it gives a little cushioning. And I will be, well, hopefully I won't be wearing the boot for too much longer, but it really depends on how my ankle's doing. I haven't worn it much today. Actually, I haven't worn it at all today. But I can tell I'm having some issues, and when I go back to work, standing for 6.5 hours plus the hour and a half travel to work and back, well, honestly, my body doesn't like it. And I know I should be looking for something that will allow me to sit, or will at least just allow me to sit down every once in a while. But you know what? I've been doing my job for over 13 years. I actually do. I love it. It's, I mean, it's not the most glamorous job in the world by any means. And I know that it is so far off field from what I used to do. But you know what? I like my job, even when some days I'm just not very good at it. So, one of the reasons I'm not too afraid to do this, that I'm not too worried about putting this chapter out a little late, is the fact nobody has watched the previous 3 chapters yet. uh, except for my main channel, because oh well, nobody has really watched the previous four four chapters, so I feel like I've got a little bit of leeway for this. The person that I was originally recording this for has already actually heard the book. But I want to do this book. One of the reasons I started this channel was to do the Sword of Shannara and the other the rest of the Shannara series. And I mean, there are 20 books that they've gone through. They haven't read the other 16. So, hopefully we will get to enjoy those books together, but I intend on recording. It's going to take a little while till I get there. And they're enjoy the other books too, so we'll keep it that way. What I really want to know, though, does anybody want me to continue on A Spell for Chameleon by Piers Anthony? I want to do the books, but I need to get a recording schedule set up for myself, since where I am, I don't want to be doing this all. I don't want to be doing like 15 chapters, or like I can't be recording a chapter a day with all these different books. They're all really long. They take anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Then the editing takes another 3 to 4 hours on top of that. And when I'm back to work, and I will be back to work in just a couple of days, I just don't have the time. I get 2, maybe 3 days a week where I know I can record. One of those days, it's my husband works a night shift, but I also from Thursday evening to Friday morning. But I work Thursday and Friday, and I do need some sleep before I go to work. So that's one of those days, like, although I can record, I really can't. And I can't record while he's home because he needs to sleep. We have one day off a week together, and I'm not going to take that up by recording and making him be quiet. It's his one day of relaxation. I'm not going to take that away from him. And yeah, so really I've got 2 days a week I can record, which are Wednesdays and Saturdays. And of those 2 days, I need to get a lot of things done other than just recording. Like laundry. Yes, I can do laundry while I'm recording, but where I live in an apartment building and we can't have the a washer and dryer in our own apartments, in our own space. Hardwood sucks for that. So I have to babysit my laundry. That's an hour and a half gone out of my day if I'm just doing one load. Plus, we've got like 120, something like 120, no, almost, I think it's 130 units in this building. That doesn't sound like a lot to a lot of people. But we have 6 washers and 6 dryers for the entire building. You have to fight to get your clothes clean here. weekend sucked for that. Uh, and of course, there's all those other things like doctor's appointments and grocery shopping and all the fun. Every day we have to be human beings. So, yeah. Sorry, I have wasted 10 minutes of your time and I haven't even started talking about the book. So, where we left off on chapter 4, Shay and Flick have run away from the Shady Vale to get to safety, of course. And they are now, well, they just by the skin of their teeth got away from the skull bearer, and only because the sun came up. Now, if they hadn't have forgotten Al-Anon stating, don't travel at night, travel during the day, it wouldn't be so much of a problem. But I don't know, in my brain I've always sort of pictured them as like late teens, like Shay being like 17 and Flick being like 19 or 20, but they're young men. And it's been this happened 3 weeks after they were just very lightly told, don't travel at night. And the one who told them that disappeared before he could give them any more information. And Baranor did not pass that info on. So I believe it's been a long time since I've read these books. So for me, it's like it's reading it is a remembering of, oh wow, yes, woohoo. I'm nuts, don't mind me. So for this, I believe they're getting to see the Prince of Leia. So let's get a move on. I'm not making any guess on times for this one, as I'm already 13 minutes in. So, The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. Chapter 5. By late afternoon of that same day, the Valemen had reached the Highland city of Leah. The stone and mortar walls that bounded the city were a welcome haven to the weary travelers. Even though the bright afternoon sun made their hot, dull gray mass appear as unfriendly as low-heated iron, the very size and bulk of the walls were repugnant to the Valemen, who preferred the freedom of the more pregnable forest lands surrounding their own home. But exhaustion quickly pushed any dislikes aside, and they passed without hesitating through the west gates and into the narrow streets of the city. It was a busy hour, with people pushing and shoving their way past the small shops and markets that lined the entryway to the walled city, then ran inwards towards Menion's home. A stately old mansion, screened by trees and hedges that bordered carefully manicured lawns and fragrant gardens. Leah appeared to be a great metropolis to the men of the Shady Vale, though in fact comparatively small when one considered the size of the great cities of the deep Southland, or even the border city of Terrace. Leah was a city set apart from the rest of the world, and travelers passed through its gates only infrequently. It was self-contained, existing primarily to serve the needs of its own people. The monarchy that governed the land was the oldest in the Southland. It was the only law that its subjects knew, and perhaps only one they needed. Shay had never been convinced of this, though the Highland people, for the most part, were content with the government and the way of life it provided. As the Valemen maneuvered their way through the crowds, Shay found himself reflecting on his improbable friendship with Menion Leah. It would have to be termed improbable, he mused, because on the surface they seemed to have so little in common. Valeman and Highlander, with backgrounds so completely dissimilar as to defy any meaningful comparison. Shay, the adopted son of an innkeeper, hard-headed, pragmatic, and raised in the tradition of working men. Menion, the only son of the royal house of Leah, and heir to the throne. Born into a life filled with responsibilities he pointedly ignored, possessed of a brash self-confidence that he tried to conceal, with only moderate success, and blessed with an uncanny hunter's instinct that merited grudging respect even from so severe a critic as Flick. Their political philosophies were as unalike as their backgrounds. Shay was staunchly conservative, an advocate of the old ways, while Menion was convinced that the old ways had proved ineffective in dealing with the problems of the races. Yet, for all their differences, they had formed a friendship that evidenced mutual respect. Menion found his small friend to be anachronistic in his thinking at times, but he admired his conviction and determination. The Valeman, contrary to Flick's oft-expressed opinion, was not blinded to Menion's shortcomings, but he saw in the Prince of Leah something others were inclined to overlook, a strong, compelling sense of right and wrong. At the present time, Menion Leah was pursuing life without any particular concern for the future. He traveled a good deal. He hunted the highland forests, but for the most part he seemed to spend his time finding new ways to get into trouble. His hard-earned expertise with the longbow and as a tracker achieved no useful purpose. On the contrary, it merely served to aggravate his father, who had repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, attempted to interest his son and only heir in the problems of governing his kingdom. One day, Menion would be king, but Shay doubted that his light-hearted friend ever gave the possibility more than a passing thought. This was foolish, if somewhat expected. Menion's mother had died several years ago. shortly after Shay had first visited the Highlands. Menion's father was not an old man, but the death of a king did not always come with age, and many former rulers of Leia had died suddenly and unexpectedly. If something unforeseen should befall his father, Menion would become king, whether he was prepared or not. There would be some lessons learned then, Shay thought, and smiled in spite of himself. The Leah ancestral home was a wide, two-story stone building nestled peacefully amid a cluster of spreading hickories and small gardens. The grounds were screened away from the surrounding city by high shrubbery. A broad park lay directly across the small walkway fronting the home, and as the Velman crossed wearily to the front gates, children splashed playfully through a small pond at the hub of the park's several paths. The day was still warm, and people hurried past the travelers on their way to meet friends or to reach their homes and families. In the west, the late afternoon sky was deepening into a soft golden haze. The tall iron gates were ajar, and the Veilman walked quickly toward the front door of the home, winding through the long stone walkways, high shrubbery, and garden borders. They were still approaching the stone threshold at the front of the home when the heavy oak door opened from within, and there, unexpectedly, was Menion Leah, dressed in a multicolored cloak and vest of green and pale yellow. His lean, whip-like frame moved with the graceful ease of a cat. He was not a big man, though several inches taller than the Veilman, but he was broad through the shoulders, and his long arms gave him a rangy look. He was on his way down a side path, but when he caught sight of the two ragged, dusty figures approaching along the main walk, he stopped short. A moment later, his eyes went wide with surprise. "Shay!" he exclaimed sharply. "What in the name of all... What happened to you?" He rushed over quickly to his friend and gripped the slim hand warmly. "Good to see you, Menion," Shay said with a smile. The Highlander stepped back a pace, and his gray eyes studied them shrewdly. "I never expected my letter would get results this quickly." He trailed off and studied the other's wary face. "It hasn't, has it? But don't tell me. I don't want to hear it. I'd rather assume, for the sake of our friendship, that you came just to visit me. And brought distrustful old Flick too, I see. This is a surprise." He grinned quickly past Shay at the scowling Flick, who nodded curtly. "This wasn't my idea, you may be sure." "I wish that our friendship alone were the reason for this visit," Shay sighed heavily. "I wish I didn't have to involve you in any of this. But I'm afraid that we're in serious trouble, and you are the one person who might be able to help us." Menion started to smile, then changed his mind quickly as he caught the mood reflected in the other's drawn face and nodded soberly. "Nothing funny about this, is there? Well, a hot bath and some dinner are the first order of business. We can discuss what brought you here later. Come on in. My father's engaged on the border, but I'm at your disposal." Once inside, Menion directed the servants to take charge of the Valemen, and they were led off to a welcome bath and a change of clothes. An hour later, the three friends gathered in the great hall for a dinner that would ordinarily have fed twice their number, but on this night it barely satisfied them. As they ate, Shay related to Menion the strange tale behind their flight from Shady Vale. He described Flick's meeting with the mysterious wanderer Alanon, and the involved story behind the sword of Shannara. It was necessary, despite Alanon's order of secrecy, if he must ask Menion's help. He told of the coming of Balinor with his terrorist warning, of the narrow escape from the black skull creature, and finally of their flight to the highlands. Shay did all the talking. Flick was unwilling to enter into the conversation, resisting the temptation he felt to elaborate on his own part in the events of the past weeks. He chose to keep quiet because he was determined not to trust Menion. He was convinced that it would be better for the Valemen if at least one of them kept his guard up and his mouth closed. Menion Leah listened quietly to the long tale, evincing no visible surprise until the part about Shay's background, with which he appeared immeasurably pleased. His lean brown face remained for the most part an inscrutable mask, broken only by that of the perpetual half-smile and the small wrinkles at the corner of his sharp gray eyes. He recognized quickly enough why the Valemen had come to him. They could never expect to make it from Leah through the lowlands of Cleet, and from there through the Black Oaks, without assistance from someone who knew the country. Someone they could trust. Correction, Menion thought, smiling inwardly. Someone Shay could trust. He knew that Flick would never have agreed to come to Leah unless his brother had insisted. There had never been much of a friendship between Flick and himself. Still, they were both here, both willing to seek his help, whatever the reason, and he would never be able to refuse anything to Shay, even when there was a risk to his own life. Shay finished his story and waited patiently for Menion's response. The Highlander seemed lost in thought, his eyes fixed on the half glass of wine at his elbow. When he spoke, his voice was distant. "The Sword of Shannara. I haven't heard that story in years. never really believed it was true. Now, out of complete obscurity, it appears with my old friend Shay Omsford as the heir apparent. Or are you? His eyes snapped up suddenly. You could be a red herring, a decoy for these Northland creatures to chase and destroy. How can we be sure about Alanon? From the tale you've told me, he seems almost as dangerous as the things hunting you. Perhaps even one of them. Flick startled noticeably at this suggestion, but Shay shook his head firmly. I can't bring myself to believe it doesn't make any sense. Maybe not, continued Menion slowly, inwardly musing over the prospect. Could be I'm getting old and suspicious. Frankly, this whole story is pretty improbable. If it's true, you are fortunate to have gotten this far on your own. There are a great many tales of the Northland, of the evil that dwells in the wilderness above the Strelahem plains. Have power, they say, beyond understanding of any mortal being. He trailed off for a moment, then sipped gingerly at his wine. The sword of Shannara. Just the possibility that the legend might be true is enough to... He shook his head and grinned openly. How can I deny myself the chance to find out? You'll need a guide to get you to the Anar, and I'm your man. I knew you would be. Shay reached over and gripped his hand in thanks. Flick groaned softly, but managed a feeble smile. Now then, let's see where we stand. Menion took charge quickly, and Flick went back to drinking wine. What about these elf stones? Let's have a look at them. Shay quickly produced the small leather pouch and emptied the contents into his open palm. The 3 stones sparkled brightly in the torchlight, their blue glow deep and rich. Menion touched one gently, then picked it up. They are indeed beautiful, he acknowledged approvingly. I don't know when I've seen their like, but how can they help us? I don't know that yet, admitted the Veilman reluctantly. I only know what Alanon told us, that the stones were only to be used in emergencies, and that they were very powerful. Well, I hope that he was right, snorted the other. I would hate to discover the hard way that he was mistaken. But I suppose we'll have to live with that possibility. He paused for a moment, then watched as Shay placed the stones back in the pouch and tucked the leather container into his tunic front. When the Veilman looked up again, he was staring blankly into his wine glass. I do know something of the man called Balinor, Shay. He is a fine soldier. I doubt we could find his equal in the whole of the Southland. We might be better off to seek the aid of his father. You would be better protected by the soldiers of Calhorn than by the forest-dwelling dwarves of the Anar. I know the roads to Triss, and all of them are safe, but almost any path to the Anar will run directly through the black oaks. Not the safest place in the Southland, as you know. Alanon told us to go to the Anar, persisted Shay. He must have had a reason, and until I find him again, I'm not taking any chances. Besides, Alanon himself advised us to follow his instructions. Menion shrugged. That's unfortunate, because even if we manage to get through the Black Oaks, I really don't know much about the land beyond. I'm told that it's relatively an unsettled country all the way to the Anar forests. The inhabitants are mostly Southlanders and dwarves who should not prove dangerous to us. Callhaven is a small dwarf village on the Silver River in the Lower Anar. I don't think we'll have much trouble finding it if we get that far. First, we have to navigate the lowlands of Cleet, which will be especially bad with the spring thaws, and then the Black Oaks. That will be the most dangerous part of the trip. Can't we find a way around? Shay asked hopefully. Menion poured himself another glass of wine and passed the decanter to Flick, who accepted it without blinking. It would take weeks. North of Leah is a Rainbow Lake. If we go that way, we have to circle the entire lake to the north through the Rune Mountains. The Black Oaks stretch south from the lake for 100 miles. If we try to go south and come north again on the other side, it will take us at least 2 weeks. And it's open country all the way. No cover at all. We have to go east through the lowlands, then cut through the oaks. Flick frowned, recalling on how their last visit to Leah, Menion has succeeded in losing them for several days in that dreaded forest, where they were menaced by wolves and ravaged by hunger. They had barely escaped with their lives. Old Flick remembers the Black Oaks, laughed Menion as he caught the other's dark expression. Well, Flick, this time we should be better prepared. It's treacherous country, but no one knows it better than I do. And we aren't likely to be followed there. Still, we'll tell no one where we're going. Simply say that we're off for an extended hunting trip. My father has his own problems anyway. He won't even miss me. He's used to having me gone, even for weeks at a time. He paused for a moment and looked to Shay to see if he had forgotten anything. The Veilman grinned at the Highlander's undisguised enthusiasm. Menion, I knew we could count on you. It will be good to have you along. Flick looked openly disgusted, and Menion, catching the look, could not allow the opportunity for a little fun at the other's expense to pass. I think we ought to talk for a minute about what's in this for me, he declared suddenly. I mean, what do I get out of this if I do guide you safely to Callhaven? What do you get? Exclaimed Flick without thinking. Why should you? It's all right, the other interrupted quickly. I had forgotten you, old Flick, but you don't need to worry. I don't intend to take anything from your share. What are you talking about, Sly One? Raged Flick. I did not mean ever to take anything. That's enough. Shay leaned forward, his face flushed. This cannot continue if we are to travel together. Menion, you must cease your attempts to bait my brother into anger, and you, Flick, must put aside, once and for all, your pointless suspicions of Menion. We must have some faith in one another, and we must be friends. Menion looked down sheepishly, and Flick was biting his lip in disgust. Shay sat back quietly as the anger drained out of him. Well spoken, acknowledged Menion after a moment. Flick, here is my hand on it. Let's make a temporary truce, at least for Shay. Flick looked at the extended hand and then slowly accepted it. Words come easily for you, Menion. I hope you mean them this time. The Highlander accepted the rebuke with a smile. A truce, Flick. He released the Veilman's hand and drained his wine glass. He knew he had convinced Flick of nothing. It was growing late now, and all three were eager to complete their plans and retire for the night. They had quickly decided that they would leave early the following morning. Menion arranged for them to be outfitted with light camping gear, including backpacks, hunting cloaks, provisions, and weapons. He produced a map of the country east of Leah, but it was poorly detailed because the lands were so little known. The lowlands of Cleet, which spread from the highlands eastward to the Black Oaks, was a dismal, treacherous moor. Yet, on the map, it was no more than a blank white area with the name written in. The Black Oaks stood out prominently, the dense mass of forest land running from the Rainbow Lake southward, standing like a giant wall between Leah and the Anar. Menion discussed briefly with the Veilman his knowledge of the terrain and weather conditions at this time of year. But, like the map, his information was sketchy. Most of what the travelers would find could not be accurately anticipated, and the unexpected could be most dangerous. By midnight, the three were in bed, their preparations for the journey to the Anar complete. In the room he was sharing with Flick, Shay lay back wearily in the softness of the bedding and studied for a moment the darkness beyond his open window. The night had clouded over, the sky a mass of heavy, rolling blackness that settled ominously about the misty highlands. Gone was the heat of the day, blown east by the cooling night breezes, and throughout the sleeping city there was a peaceful solitude. In the bed next to him, Flick was already asleep, his breathing heavy and regular. Shay watched him thoughtfully. His own head was heavy and his body weary from the struggle to reach Leah. Yet he remained awake. He was beginning to realize for the first time the truth about his predicament. The flight to reach Menion was only the first step in a journey that might very possibly go on for years. Even if they managed to reach the Anar safely, Shay knew that eventually they would be forced to run again. The search to find them would continue until the Warlock Lord was destroyed or Shay was dead. Until then, there would be no going back to the Vale, to the home and father he had left, and wherever they were, their safety would last only until the wing hunters found them once again. The truth was terrifying in the silent darkness. Shay Omsford was alone with his fear, and deep within him he fought back against a rising knot of terror. He took a long time to finally fall asleep. It was a dull, sunless day that followed, a day damp and chilling to the human flesh and bone. Shay and his two companions found it devoid of any warmth and comfort as they journeyed eastward through the misty highlands of Leah and began a slow descent towards the cheerless climate of the lowlands beyond. There was no talking among them as they hiked in single file down the narrow footpaths which would wind tediously about the grey, hulking borders and clamps of dying, formless bush. Menion led, his keen eyes carefully picking out the often obscure traces of a trail, his stride long and relaxed as he moved almost gracefully over the gradually roughing terrain. Across his lean back he carried a small pack to which he had attached a great ash bow and arrows. In addition, beneath the pack and fastened to his body by a long leather strap was the ancient sword which his father had given him when he reached the age of manhood. The sword which was the birthright of the Prince of Leah. Its cold grey iron glimmered faintly in the dim light, and Shay, who followed several paces back, found himself wondering if it was at all like the fabled sword of Shannara. His elven eyebrows lifted quizzically as he tried to peer into the endless gloom of the land ahead. Nothing seemed alive. It was a dead land for dead things, and the living were trespassers here. Not a very stimulating idea, he grinned faintly to himself as he forced his mind to turn to other matters. Flick brought up the rear, his sturdy back bearing the bulk of the provisions that would have to sustain them until they were through the lowlands of Cleet and the forbidding black oaks. Once they had gotten that far, if they got that far, they would be forced to buy or trade for food from the few scattered inhabitants of the country beyond, or, as a last resort, seek nourishment from the land itself, a prospect that Flick did not particularly relish, although he felt somewhat more secure in his mind now that Menion was genuinely interested in helping them on this journey. He was nevertheless still unconvinced of the Highlanders' ability to do so. The events of their last trip were still fresh in his mind, and he wanted no part of another hair-raising experience like that one. The first day wore on quickly as the three traveled past the boundaries of the kingdom of Leah, and by nightfall they had reached the fringes of the dismal lowlands of Crete. They found shelter for the night in a small vale under the negligible protection of a few scruffy trees and some heavy brush. The dampness of the mist had soaked their clothing completely through, and the chill of the descending night left them shivering with cold. A brief attempt was made to start a fire in an effort to gain some small warmth and dryness, but the wood in the area was so thoroughly saturated with moisture that it was impossible to get it to burn. Eventually, they gave up on the fire and settled for some cold rations while wrapped in blankets which had carefully been waterproofed at the start of the journey. Little was said because no one felt much like talking beyond mumbled curses upon the general weather conditions. There was no sound from the darkness beyond where they sat huddled within the brush. It was a penetrating stillness that prodded the mind with sudden, unexpected apprehension, forcing it to listen in a frightened effort to catch some faint, reassuring rustle of life. But there was only the silence and blackness, and not even the wisp of the brief wind touched their chilled faces as they lay quietly in the blankets. Eventually, the weariness of the day's march stole over them, and one by one they dropped uneasily off to sleep. The second and third day were unimaginably worse than the first. It rained the entire time, a slow, chilling drizzle that soaked first the clothing, then penetrated into the skin and bone, and finally reached the very nerve centers, so that the only feeling the weary body would permit was one of thorough, discomforting wetness. The air was damp and cold in the day, dropping off to a near freeze at night. Everything around the three travelers seemed to be totally beaten down by this lingering coldness. What little brush of the small foliage could be seen was twisted and dying, formless clumps of wood and withered leaves that silently waited to crumble and disappear altogether. No human or animal lived here. Even the smallest rodent would have been swallowed up and consumed by the clutching softness of an earth seeped through with the chilling dampness of long, sunless, lifeless days and nights. Nothing moved, nothing stirred as the three walked eastward through the shapeless country where there was no trail, no hint that anyone or anything had ever passed that way before, or would ever do so again. The sun never appeared during their march. No faint trace of its direct rays flickering downward to show that somewhere beyond this dead, forgotten land was a world of life. Whether it was the perpetual mist or the heavy clouds or a combination of both that so completely blotted out the sky remained an unanswered question. Their only world was a cheerless, hateful gray land through which they walked. By the fourth day, they began to despair. Even though there had been no further sign of the winged hunters of the Warlock Lord, and it appeared that any pursuit had been abandoned, the possibility offered little solace as the hours dragged by and the silence grew deeper, the lands more sullen. Even Menion's great spirit began to waver, and doubt wormed its stealthy way into his usually confident mind. He began to wonder if they had lost the direction, if perhaps they had even traveled in a circle. He knew the land would never tell them that once lost in its bleak country, they were lost forever. Shay and Flick felt the fear even more deeply. They knew nothing of the lowlands and lacked the hunter's skill and instinct that Menion possessed. They relied completely on him, but sensed that something was wrong, even though the Highlander had purposely kept silent about his own doubts, so not to worry them. The hours passed, and the cold and the wet and the hateful deadness of the land remained unchanged. They felt their last shred of confidence in one another and in themselves begin to slowly slip slowly, agonizingly away. Finally, as the fifth day of the journey drew to a close, and still the lowland bleakness stretched on with no visible sign of the desperately sought after black oaks, Shay wearily called a halt to the endless march and dropped heavily to the ground, his questioning eyes on the Prince of Leah. Menion shrugged and looked absently at the misty lowlands about them, his handsome face drawn with the chill of the air. "I won't lie to you," he murmured. "I can't be sure that we've kept our sense of direction. We may have traveled in a circle. We may even be hopelessly lost." Flick dropped his pack disgustedly and looked at his brother with his own special "I told you so" look. Shay glanced at him and turned hurriedly back to Menion. "I can't believe we're completely lost. Isn't there any way we can get our bearings?" "I'm open to suggestions." His friend smiled humorously, stretching as he too dropped his pack to the rough ground and sat down beside the brooding Flick. "What's the trouble, old Flick? Have I gotten you into it again?" Flick glanced over at him angrily, but looking into the gray eyes, he quickly reconsidered his dislike of the man. There was genuine concern there, and even a trace of sadness at the thought that he had failed them. With rare affection, Flick reached over and placed a comforting hand on the other's shoulder, nodding silently. Suddenly, Shay leaped up and flung off his own pack, hastily rummaging through its contents. "The stones can help us," he cried. For a moment, the other two looked blankly at him, and then, in a sudden understanding, rose expectantly to their feet. A moment later, Shay produced the small leather pouch with its precious contents. They all stared at the worn container in mute anticipation that the elf-stones would at last prove their value, that they would somehow aid them in escaping the wasteland of Cleet. Eagerly, Shay opened the drawstrings and carefully dropped the three small blue stones into his upturned palm. They lay there twinkling dimly as the three watched and waited. "Hold them up, Shay," urged Menion after a moment. "Perhaps they need the light." The Veilman did as he was told, watching the blue stones anxiously. Nothing happened. He waited a moment longer before lowering his hand. Alanon had cautioned him against use of the elf stones, except in the gravest of emergencies. Perhaps the stones would only come to his aid in special situations. He began to despair. Whatever the case, he was faced with the hard fact that he had no idea how the stones were to be used. He looked desperately at his friends. "Well, try something else," exclaimed Menion heatedly. Shay took the stones between his hands and rubbed them together sharply, then shook them and cast them like dice. Still nothing happened. Slowly he retrieved them from the damp earth and carefully wiped them clean. Their deep blue color seemed to draw him to them, and he peered closely into their clear, glass-like core, as if somehow the answer might be found there. "Maybe you should talk to them or something?" Flick's voice trailed off hopefully. A mental picture of Alanon's dark face, bowed and locked in deep concentration, flashed sharply in Shay's mind. Perhaps the secret of the elf stones could be unlocked in a different way, he thought suddenly. Holding them out in his palm, The little Veilman closed his eyes and concentrated his thoughts on reaching into the deep blueness, searching for the power that they so desperately needed. Silently, he urged the elf stones to help them. Long moments passed, seemingly hours. He opened his eyes, and the three friends watched and waited while the stones rested in Shay's palm, their blue gleam dull in the darkness and damp of the mist. Then, with a ferocious suddenness, they flared up in a blinding blue glare that caused the travelers to reel back from the brightness, shielding their unprotected eyes. So powerful was the aura that Shay nearly dropped the small gems in astonishment. The sharp glow became steadily brighter, lighting up the dead land about them as the sun had never been able to do. The brightness intensified from the deep blue to a bright blue so dazzling that the awestruck watchers were actually hypnotized. It grew, steadied, and abruptly shot forward like a huge beacon, traveling to their left, cutting effortlessly through the mist-covered grayness to rest at last, some hundreds, perhaps thousands of yards ahead, upon the great gnarled boles of the ancient black oaks. The light held for one brief moment, and then it was gone. The gray mist returned with its chill dampness, and the three small blue stones gleamed quietly as they had before. Menyon recovered quickly, clapping Shay sharply on the back and grinning broadly. In one quick motion, he had his pack back in place and was ready to travel, his eyes already scanning the now invisible spot through which the vision of the black oaks appeared. Shay hastily returned the elf stones to the pouch, and the Veilmen strapped on their packs. Not a word was spoken as they walked rapidly in the direction the beacon had flashed, each watching eagerly for the long expected forest. Gone was the chill of the gray darkness and the slow drizzle of the past 5 days. Gone was the despair that they had felt so strongly only minutes before. There was only the conviction that escape from these dreaded lowlands was at last at hand. They did not question, did not doubt the vision the stones had revealed to them. The Black Oaks was the most dangerous forest in the Southland, but at this particular moment it seemed a haven of hope compared to the land of Cleet. The time seemed endless as they pushed ahead. It could have been hours, or perhaps only minutes later, when suddenly the graying mist grudgingly gave way to huge, moss-covered trunks, which rose hulkingly into the air to be lost in the haze above. The exhausted trio halted together, their tired eyes gazing joyfully on the cheerless monsters that stood evenly, endlessly before them. Their great mass, an impregnable wall of damp, scarred bark on wide, deep rooted bases that had stood there for countless ages of men, and would very likely be there until the destruction of the land itself. It was an awesome sight, even in the dim light of the misty lowlands, and the watchers felt the undeniable presence of a life force in those woods, so incredibly ancient that it almost commanded a deep, grudging respect for its years. It was as if they had stepped into another age, another world, and all that stood so silently before them had the magic of an enticing, dangerous fairy tale. The stones were right, murmured Shay softly, a slow smile spreading over his tired but happy face. He breathed deeply with relief and flashed a quick grin. The black oaks, pronounced Menion in admiration. Here we go again, sighed Shay. And that, my dear friends, is the end of chapter 5. So that definitely was not nearly as long as the last couple of chapters in Dragon Song have been. This, not counting my intro at the start of this, I think this video is going to be, well, just the recording time for everything was just a little under an hour, which isn't bad. Honestly, for all that the writing is smaller and there's a heck of a lot more pages, this book paces faster when reading it aloud, which is good because there's a lot of pages. What I think I might do tomorrow is maybe record 2 or 3 more chapters of this as well, so I can get some of this put aside. And I will do the first chapter and maybe the second of Dragon Drums on Saturday. Heck, if I get really good, I might even do 4 or do 3. As the first few chapters of the book are relatively short in comparison to Dragon Singer. And honestly, after the marathon chapter 4 is the marathon, chapter 6 looks to be a little longer, but that's still just over 30 pages. So that'll be about a 2 hour. Yeah, honestly, except for one real huge marathon chapter, all of the chapters in Dragon Drums are much easier to get through. But we're not talking about Dragon Drums. We're talking about the Sword of Shannara. So, we've got to meet Menion Leah. We've seen his home. We know he's a prince. Someday he will be king. But he really doesn't do the job that he's supposed to be doing. He goes out and does hunting and other things that catch his fancy. Which is why Flick doesn't really like him. He doesn't feel that, from what I gather, he doesn't feel that Menion is not so much worthy, more along the lines of he hasn't earned the respect that uh, Flick feels that he should be going for, since he's got a lot of things riding on him. If you're wondering, I've got some hand cream in there so it's easy to transport around instead of a great big huge bottle. Ugh, my hands are so dry. This weather is really annoying right now. It's going from snow to rain to snow to rain. It's too cold. Like, it's too cold to turn the heater off, but keeping the heater on for too long just makes you really, 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 really dry. And, well, I'm really dry. You've been using it on my lips because they've been cracking. And it's been helping. I got a split right here from having dry lips at one point. I'm thinking of running up to the store tomorrow before I do any recording, after my doctor's appointment, before I do any recording. So I want to grab something to nibble on for the next couple of days. And I want to keep myself going, of course. I don't know what to say. Oh, if it works on my computer, I will have my my capture card either tomorrow or Saturday. It's on its way from Amazon. At that point, we will be able to play the Switch for live stream. Just because it'll be fun. I've got all 4 of the Pikmin games. I've got Harvestella, which I may not stream for a bit. As much fun as it is, I want to finish off the one I've got going right now. I'm like about halfway through. I don't want to start off right at the beginning again. It's a lot of friggin' work. Just gotta figure out how much. Well, it's a cross between Harvest Moon and Final Fantasy. Is how I like to describe it. So, yeah, that'll be coming up. If the capture card works. I think it really depends on my computer. My computer's being a pain in the backside lately. Well, as you see, we've got a skitter paw, but not so much anything else of a skitter right now. And Diamond's snoring over on the bed. These girls are a joy. So, I guess I really don't have a lot to say as an outro because I've been pretty much giving some outros for the last few days. I'm really looking forward to the next... Well, I'm just looking forward to sharing all of these books with you because I really do enjoy myself. I'm really enjoying them myself as I'm reading them. So, if you guys have all made it this far in, I really, really thank you because, hey, you made it past the first 13 minutes of me rambling and the last 8 minutes of me rambling. You're amazing. Thank you. I hope, if you feel like it, please give a like, a comment, and if you really want to keep on getting more of my reading and my horrible stammer when I get the word wrong, please subscribe. I don't have any description set up yet, but the lists that if you go into the main channel, under lists you can get all of the books in order and easier to read that way or listen to that way. I hope you all have a great morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you right now. Hope it's absolutely wonderful. Have a great one, you guys, and I'm going to say good night.